Racism. I think most people would agree that the world would be a much better place without it. But how do we get rid of it? Well, I think I have a solution.
Oh, who's gonna believe that?
Do you know what race this man is? How about this one? Or this? Well, congratulations.
You're racist.
According to this video from authority on the subject, Mr. Beat. A lot of people have been asking me to respond to Mr. Beat again, and so much nonsense is based on the ideas he's peddling here that I had to talk about it. It's honestly pretty wild to revisit the roots of the woke order after so long, but it's important to talk about because, well, it keeps coming back year after year. People who think this stuff is dead have a pretty short memory, because this is woke death number 3 of my adult life.
A racist is a person, organization, or institution continuing to believe in, advocate, perpetuate, or passively accept the proposition that there are separate races among the human species, in spite of all of the well-known Human Genome Project evidence that separate human races do not exist. What's crazy to me is that there is absolutely no evidence that anyone even used the term race or anything like it before the Middle Ages. In the late 1400s and 1500s, it was the Europeans who first began to use the term to justify their enslavement of people that they encountered with darker skin pigmentation in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. What did they use to justify enslaving people with darker skin color? Passages they read in the Old Testament of the Bible. So racism and race are relatively new phenomena.
How about this one? The word environment was first coined in 1603, so clearly the environment is a social construct. This is the level of argument we're getting here. No, every society has observed differences in people groups, and this modern articulation of this difference, expressed by the term race, is not significantly different. It has more baggage because of the history surrounding it, but race is reality, and its expression in language and culture is no more novel than the environment's reality. Every developed civilization has some observation of in-group and out-group, which invariably has a physical component as well. I could list some examples, but honestly, it would be more useful to try and come up with exceptions who somehow don't observe this. Good luck if you're trying to find one. Mr. B seems to think that this word to describe physical differences in ancestry we call race is somehow totally unique to Europeans in the 15th century, and the implication, in line with the rest of his video, is that we should all just totally ignore physical differences between people groups because it was all just made up whole cloth out of literally nothing at all by European Christians.
So racist.
But this is a problem for Mr. Beat because it's not in line with any serious inquiry into population genetics or cross-cultural history. Even if he shifted his argument to say that this framing of the difference between people groups as race is a new thing, made up whole cloth out of literally nothing by European Christians, he'd still be arguing against himself, because that would acknowledge that some differences actually do exist, whether they're called race or not, and then he'd be racist according to his own definition to passively accept the proposition that there are separate races among the human species, even though he tries to wiggle out of it by not calling it a race. Sorry, Mr. Beat. According to your logic, even still.
You're racist!
It's troubling to see the definitions that show up for race when you do a search. Here's what shows up. The first definition, each of the major divisions of humankind having distinct physical characteristics. A group of people sharing the same culture, history, language, etc., an ethnic group. A group or set of people or things with a common feature or features. Notice how only the first definition mentions physical characteristics, which is the race that most of us think of. In particular, we tend to think of skin color. But how ridiculous is that? I can change my skin color by going outside in July for an entire afternoon.
Yes, actually, I could see you are white, even if you got a tan. Next thing he'll be saying he doesn't care if you're green or blue or purple, or saying we need to educate people that there's only one race, the human race. But to be fair, I don't love this definition either. I personally prefer social scientist Steve Saylor's definition. A racial group is an extended family that is inbred to some degree. That's it. There's no need to say how big the extended family has to be or just how inbred. This is a scalable solution. Do you want to know a lot about a few people? Then the more inbred, the more distinct the racial group. Or do you want to know a little about a lot of people? The less inbred, the larger the group. Average hereditary differences are as as one might expect, inherited. With enough inbreeding, hereditary differences will emerge that will first be recognizable to the geneticist, then to the physical anthropologist, and finally to the average person. I'm more interested in the reality that there are partly inbred extended families than in what it's called. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find a better word than race.
See how my skin color is changing? Pretty nifty, isn't it? Pure race does not exist, genetically speaking. We have good old science to prove that. The Human Genome Project, the international science experiment which attempted to map the DNA of every human being to ever exist, had one important conclusion: that race, as we know it, does not exist. They said different genes for physical traits, such as skin color and hair color, can be identified between individuals, but no consistent patterns of genes of the approximately 20,500 genes found in human beings exist to distinguish one race from another.
Despite the Human Genome Project's assertion that race cannot be indicated genetically, this is not backed up by their actual findings. The Human Genome Project did state that race cannot be defined or indicated genetically, and they pointed out that humans share 99.9% of their DNA. However, within that 0.1% variation lies meaningful differences that correlate with ancestral origins. These genetic patterns are measurable, and not just by the traditional method of looking at a person. Genetic testing services like 23andMe can analyze DNA and reliably determine a person's geographic ancestry. This ability to map genetic markers to geographic ancestry is proof of genetic differences between human populations, differences that align with what society has historically labeled as race. Of course, the term race is not purely biological, but just because these categories of race are culturally variable to some extent doesn't mean that the biological differences they describe are invented. The distinctions observed between groups are rooted in genetic ancestry, and race serves as a shorthand, imperfect for every instance, but real for these ancestral differences. If these differences didn't exist, genetic testing companies wouldn't be able to determine somebody's ancestry by analyzing their DNA. Race is observational. It reflects actual, measurable patterns in human biology. The scientific community's hesitation to equate race with genetics stems, I think, from a desire to avoid controversy surrounding the concept of race. They don't want their work to be seen as political in any way, and I get that. But their reluctance to discuss race in biological terms can sometimes create confusion, like we see from Mr. Beat, because it might seem like scientists are denying that genetic differences between populations exist. In reality, scientists are being cautious based on a fear of what they might philosophically imply, even if only inadvertently. And I'm sympathetic to that, but I gotta say, I'd be far more sympathetic if it didn't so easily mislead people like Mr. Beat. The Human Genome Project linguistically rejected the word race as a biological concept in service to goals somewhat separate from its scientific mandate, but its findings do not actually deny the existence of genetic differences between populations. To avoid the implications of the term race, scientists typically prefer to discuss ancestry or population genetics, for example, sub-Saharan African ancestry, describing the genetic markers common to people from that region. I would just say black, and it would mean the same thing. These descriptors are considered more scientifically precise because they refer to population genetic patterns without implying hierarchical groupings like they think I might be implying if I just said black or white, but they mean the same thing. We don't actually need to replace the word. It isn't a social construct, it's real, and while imperfect, it reflects a practical acknowledgement of physical and genetic traits so distinct they are visible to the naked eye. Changing the word used to describe a real thing into a different, more jargony word, which means the same thing, is what we call political correctness. Because while a word existed previously in order to concisely communicate a real thing, the older word is anathematized into the bad category, even though it actually isn't at all different and is part of the common lexicon. This semantic shift is a way for people to linguistically purify themselves themselves and set themselves apart from other people, creating a language of the enlightened to reinforce a certain type of culture or in-group status. Where have I heard that before?
It essentially is a term invented to make one group of people justify that they were superior to another group of people.
We see this PC transformation happening here, and it has much more to do with establishing an in-group, ironically enough, than it does understanding the world, because they'll still acknowledge genetic differences at the end of the day. They just won't say the word race.
If every human being did these three things, and they taught their children to also do these three things, I think racism as we know it would cease to exist. I know that's a pretty bold statement. 1. Acknowledge race has no genetic basis and was a term invented by one group of people to justify that it was superior to another group of people. Absolutely everyone needs to know this, and it should be taught at a very young age.
This is the same guy who says that the school system is totally fine and teachers aren't trying to indoctrinate kids. He is himself what he denies the existence of. I don't know how best to raise kids, and I don't agree with racism. But this is science denying semantics and smothering PC culture where ideas go to die. And it's not even nicer or kinder than the alternative, it's just switched to a different mechanism to ostracize other people.
Stop using the term race to describe a person. I do not define myself by race. Not only do I feel it is an outdated term, but why should I limit how I define myself to simply the physical characteristics that I was born with? Isn't that a bit superficial? We are all multifaceted, complex, unique individuals with many different characteristics. Why should I limit to describe myself by saying I'm a white guy, or kind of a peach guy, or a blue guy, or a green guy? It's ludicrous. Labels are dangerous anyway. Sure, they come in handy, and there's definitely a time and a place for labels, but they should never define anyone.
It's not about what makes Mr. Beat comfortable or not, or what he might find to be superficial or outdated.
So there you have it. The first thing we need to do is to educate people that there is only one race, the human race.
Well, that didn't solve racism at all. Let's see if I can give it a try. Here we go. There's a scientific question, which is, what is the significance of genetic differences between people groups we call races? And there's a philosophical question, which is, what makes a human and is therefore the basis of human dignity? Because the second question is a philosophical one, it isn't threatened by the idea of scientific inquiry unless you embrace a presupposition of biological determinism or some other materialistic philosophical doctrine. Mr. Beat assumes that the philosophical question is based on the scientific question, as though he thinks that human dignity is somehow tied to biological ability. He is not really free, therefore, to explore the scientific question because it might challenge the philosophical materialistic presumption. This is oddly something which he shares in common with those who we both oppose, the eugenicists, but where I, and most contemporary critics of eugenics, oppose eugenics as a philosophical matter because human dignity is not based on the physical attributes of a person, Mr. Beat seems to accept the premise that it actually might justify such discrimination if the science said so, it's just that the science doesn't say so. So, in order to carefully guard the materialistic deterministic approach to human nature, the science then must be jealously guarded. But this is both bad philosophy and bad science, or at least bad interpretation of the facts pronounced as science. So here's what I think instead. As usual, I'm with Aristotle on this one. Aristotle's justification for human dignity is rooted in his position on free will. Free will rests in the distinction between voluntary and involuntary actions. Voluntary actions, performed with knowledge and control, are those for which individuals can be held morally responsible, while involuntary actions result from external force or ignorance. Rational deliberation is the ability to reflect on possible actions and outcomes, and it means that humans have choice, which is deliberate desire informed by reason. It's our specific defining characteristic, and all humans have it. Humans can reason and choose and then act voluntarily, making them responsible for their actions, which make them responsible for the formation of their character. The capacity for reason is what makes humans capable of voluntary actions and of moral responsibility, and through repeated choices, individuals shape their habits, and all a man's habits together create a man's character. And since character influences future actions, we are ultimately responsible for both. This ability to reason is the defining characteristic that sets human beings apart from the rest of the animal kingdom, because while animals act on instinct and environment, humans possess the unique ability to engage in rational deliberation. Unlike animals whose behavior is determined by nature, humans have the ability to reflect on their actions and choose in accordance with virtue or vice. It is this ability to act with reason rather than simply being driven by instinct or external forces that distinguishes humans and gives them the potential for moral and intellectual excellence. A badly behaved dog is the fault of the owner, because the dog isn't capable of rational deliberation or choice, and therefore can't be held responsible for its actions. And conversely, an excellently behaved dog is a credit not so much to itself as to its trainer. This human rational power is a binary. There's no half reason. It either exists within the subject or it doesn't. The important thing is that the ability to reason is a difference of kind and not a difference of degree. While often conflated, reason is actually distinct from material intelligence. If it were not distinct, the superhuman intelligence of quantum computers would award them greater dignity than human beings. If quantum computers don't exceed us in dignity, but they exceed us in material intelligence, our metric for dignity must actually not be based on material intelligence. The real metric is the power of reason possessed by all types of humans, both stupid and smart, and setting humans apart from other animals and even our own creation. Science could indicate huge chasms of material difference or no material difference at all between people groups. The basis of human dignity is not in question, so it would really make no difference. This philosophical position on human dignity can't be threatened by science, because the basis of human dignity is a philosophical question, not a material one. And this different philosophy about human beings gives me the ability to look at the material evidence with a bit more of an open mind than Mr. Beat can. I don't hate any race because of what their biology may or may not be. And if all of you thought like me, racism would cease to exist. So there you have it, Mr. Beat. I solved racism.